Halt podcast. Let's go.
You're dealing with an expert in guerrilla warfare. With a man who's the best. With guns, with knives, with his bare hands. A man who's been trained to ignore pain, ignore weather, to live off the land. His job was to dispose of enemy personnel. To kill. Period. Win by attrition.
All right. Welcome, Deborah. It's a pleasure to have you.
Hi.
When we tend to think of veterans and service members and first responders that are dealing with trauma and dealing with the difficulties of a life of service, we tend to forget about the people that are there to pick up the phone when you need them most. And that's individuals such as yourself, our dispatchers. So I am absolutely thrilled to have you on the show to share your story. So please, Deborah, how'd you find yourself in this life of service? And tell us your journey.
Oh my gosh. It started, I guess, by accident, really. After high school, I started in fashion merchandising school and stayed there for about a year. And it just wasn't for me. So I went and joined the Army, like everybody does. So that was back in 1986. Went to basic training and AIT and then met my first husband. He got stationed in Fort Hood, so that's where we moved to. Then divorced, married my second husband, had a kid, and was still in Texas at the time. So I had moved from Fort Hood down to San Antonio. Then kind of moved back to California. And I was still in the National Guard this whole time. And when I came back, I decided to go into military police just because wanted to be a law enforcement officer. And so that's where I started. Kind of, just by accident, I guess you'd say. And after that, I had been applying for civilian jobs with police departments and sheriff's departments in the Northern California. And somebody mentioned dispatching, and I said, well, what the heck, how hard could it be? And boy, was I wrong. So I started Sacramento Police Department Dispatch Academy. I was still in the National Guard at the time, and this was back in 1992. And during my academy, we got deployed to the LA riots. So
90s was a crazy time to be in that area of California. And you're dual hatting it. So you're responding at the state level as a National Guard soldier. And then on the civilian side, you're the point man. You're the person that everybody goes through to get care. And in that period of time, I mean, the riots, that's just one part. And then we had Rodney King. Then we had the tumultuous events that occurred after the O.J. Simpson trial. A lot happened.
Gosh, yeah. There was so with that, so I was at the academy. So I got pulled out of the academy to go do National Guard. And after I came back, my class was graduating. So I technically graduated with them, but I was still at the academy because they had to, I had to finish up. Yeah. I lasted 11 months with Sacramento Police and let go on probation because I just wasn't fast enough for them. It was a busy department even back in the 90s. So I went and started applying to smaller departments, and Sacramento was the one who gave me the idea to go to a smaller department, which was great because the next place I was hired on, I lasted 27 years. So I guess there was something right about that. But funny thing, you mentioned O.J. Simpson. The weekend I started with El Dorado County was the weekend that O.J. Simpson went on his infamous pursuit in the Bronco. So that's was kind of funny.
Now you mentioned the speed being an issue. Now, for a lot of us have no idea what dispatching is like. Break that down to us. Why was that an issue?
So it wasn't an issue as far as call taking, taking those phone calls and entering them. It was an issue when it came to working the radio. Because when you're at the time, they weren't, there was MDTs, mobile data terminals, as they called them. And so they would be able to push buttons and stuff, but they weren't able, the deputies or the officers weren't able to enter information into the calls per se.
Okay.
They could see the calls, but they couldn't really enter information. So as a dispatcher, we're entering that information. And when you think you have 10 or 15 officers on your channel, even more sometimes, and you're taking all their information and putting it into calls, and during a busy time of day, I just couldn't keep up because it was a manual typing and, getting that information in. So
yeah.
But once I got to a smaller department, it was, I grew with the department. And so, by the time I was not a problem.
And you were there for 27 years, man. That is
27 years. Yeah. It was,
wow.
It was a crazy time. I mean, when I started with them, they did fire and, a police department and the sheriff's department. So 3 agencies with only 5 people. And, in 1996, we lost fire department to CAL FIRE, which is the state department, and they took over dispatching all the fire departments in the county. And then in 2000, we lost the police department. But even though we're losing those agencies, our amount of call traffic and everything stayed the same. Actually got more. So when I started there, I had 2 green screens. I don't know if everybody remembers the green screens with DOS on them.
Yeah.
When I left, we had 10 screens, 3 mice, 3 keyboards. The screens controlled the phones, the radio, everything. It was quite the undertaking. And it just, and the traffic was different and the technology grew. And so it was quite interesting growing with the department and, having all that at our fingertips by the time I retired.
That's a lot. And for a lot of us, we have no concept. I mean, we can explain what we go through, and general public has a good idea of, whether it's dramatized and idolized, people understand what our military goes through. But a lot of us have no clue what it's like to be in that world of a dispatcher. Take us into that. From my
nobody calls you on their best day. So
yeah, exactly.
And it was quite eye-opening. I mean, you go in, and I was pretty naive as to what actually was going on in the world. I mean, in my own city and in on the streets. So when you get in there, you realize how much bad stuff is actually going on. And so, I mean, when I worked at Sacramento, my very first 911 call that I was allowed to take was a mom that had found her daughter had committed suicide. And, that being that first 911 call, that's just enough to rock your world, especially when you haven't dealt with that kind of stuff before, But oh gosh. So, it comes in, you take a phone call, basically. You put that call information in, and it could be anything. I mean, you don't know what's going to be on the other end of that phone when you pick it up, soup to nuts. So, it could be anything from a robbery in progress to a 3-year-old playing on the phone. I mean, that's the range that you're going to get. And when you're taking those phone calls, you don't have enough time. If you have just come off of a traumatic phone call, say you're working with a stabbing and you're trying to get information from the victim or witnesses or whatnot, you don't have time. When you're done with that call, you don't have time to process all of this stuff that comes through your head and then you're off to the next phone call, and then you're dealing with that 3-year-old, and you're trying to tell him to get mommy on the phone so that we can make sure everything is okay there. So yeah, so there's a lot of buildup of, I don't know, traumas or things. It just builds up over time. So after you take these phone calls, you're entering the call in, you have somebody working the radios, and the radios basically dispatch to the officers, whether it's a silent dispatch with some systems, or by policy, it could be a voice dispatch. It just depends on what department it is, whether they're doing that. And I don't know if anybody's listened to a scanner, so you can,
Yeah. During those early days, did you have any sort of support? And how was that you're expected just to clock in and for your entire shift, just transition from one emergency to the next, to the next, to the next, and then go home? But
yeah,
no
it was,
human,
if you can't, yeah.
no
The
human
thing
can do
was,
that.
the back then it was, if you can't handle it, you shouldn't be here at the job.
Yeah.
So you learned to deal with it. I mean, there was a lot of times I was in my car crying after work,
And there's the crux
crying
of
on the
it.
way home.
How did you deal with it? How did in those early years? How did Deborah deal with it? What were
So early years, there was a little bit of alcohol every once in a while. I didn't have anybody to talk to. One of my uncles was a cop, so when we had family gatherings, I would be able to talk to him.
Yeah.
My mom always hated it because there was a group of us eventually that were all in law enforcement, and when you're in law enforcement in the same state, you usually have the same codes and uh, penal code numbers and whatnot. And so she would get upset because we would talk in code, because that's how you do it,
Yeah.
when you're talking with somebody with the same job, you end up talking that new language that you have. And my mom would get upset because she couldn't understand what we were talking about.
Yeah. It's a
So,
way of bonding.
but yeah, and so there wasn't really, my husband at the time didn't really understand what was going on, and I could feel myself changing, but I couldn't understand how, if that makes any sense. I mean, you can feel it, but you realize everybody is your friends are kind of going away. Um, your family doesn't understand, and you just you roll with it, really. I mean, it was something that happened back then, and even when we had critical incidents, there wasn't anybody to come in and say, "Hey, how you doing?" Unlike today, in the last 5 years, there's been such a big change
Yeah.
with that. But yeah, back then it was just, it just kind of happened, and it just, you had all this buildup until, finally you have to crack sometime.
Well, yeah, you're putting more and more and more into a bucket, and at some point it's going to overfill, and that's natural progression of where we're going to now. When was that moment for you, Deborah? What happened?
Okay, so October 23rd, 2019, I dispatched a deputy to a call, actually 3 deputies to a call. It was for suspicious subjects in a marijuana grow. And if anybody knows California and rural California, we have a lot of those. Um, what was happening that we didn't know about was the cartels were coming into private individuals that they saw had like little grows, and coming in and buying, uh, paying those people to grow more for the cartels.
Hmm.
and we didn't know about this right away. So the person calling about these so-called suspicious subjects um, was actually supposed to be growing for the cartel. And he knew who these guys were and that they were there to pick up because October is harvest season here in Northern California usually. And so he knew that these people were there to take his crop,
Yeah.
and he didn't want to give it up. So he calls us. So we basically walked into an ambush.
Mm.
So the guys get out there. They talk to the guy in the house, and then they go back outside, and that's when the firefight started. And we heard, somebody yelled shots fired, and we could hear the gunshots. And then we lost communication with one of the officers out there. And come to find out later, after he had been put on the ambulance, that he had been killed out there. So, yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell. And I worked 3 hours on that call before I got a relief. And yeah.
And those are the situations that stick with anybody. Having your watch your friends out in danger, or just individuals that you serve alongside with, that's truly the most difficult part. And in a lot of combat MOS is, you're intimately linked with these individuals, and they're in a fight, but you can't help them at all, and you feel just absolutely helpless. Where did you go from there? What was Deborah? Was Deborah at that moment just like, I'm done, and walked away?
Oh my gosh.
Were you able to
No.
finally find some vulnerability and ask for help? What was next?
Well, I had been in therapy for an unrelated work. It was unrelated to work. So I had been in therapy since 2016. So after this happened, that we did get some critical incident stress management. Our peer support people were there. So right afterwards, we had like a little meeting with everybody that was in dispatch, because they called in day shift early to relieve us. So we had our little thing. Then when I finally got home, I called my therapist to make an emergency appointment. So, because I knew I would need it. And so I had the tools, but so the next day I went in for therapy, and I also had a friend who was peer support at another agency who's she was working, who my therapist's office was near where she was at. So I went from therapy over to peer support that same day. And then the next day after that, we had our big peer support meeting at our department. So, I mean, I knew I needed this, and I knew that this was going to be bad. I just didn't realize how bad. So in October 2019, we're, getting some help, and I'm getting back into regular therapy. Then along comes March of 2020, and we all go into lockdown. So you're sticking these people that have had this trauma happen to them, and you're putting them into 4 walls with nothing to do. I don't know how else to explain it. I mean, we were basically stuck at home, and there were until my telehealth became a normal thing, I wasn't able to go to therapy. So that was another problem too, on top of that. And then the supervisor that I had at the time, because I was going through anger issues and all these other things at work, she decided to take me down the micromanaging disciplinary route. So that just made me worse, because I ended up uh, not trusting my own instincts on anything, and it was bad. The depression got bad, the anxiety got bad, and not realizing that I had PTSD and really bad from this. So I had a second supervisor that worked on another shift who realized what was going on, and she was able to get me onto workman's comp and get me some more help. But even then, during that time, peer support wasn't really doing any follow-ups. We had the immediate help, but we didn't have the long-term help that we needed, at least in dispatch.
And let me take it back to you said something that I want to cover is therapy and peer support are amazing and vital, but you have to be willing to do the work. You have to be ready. And for a lot of us, we're not always ready at the beginning or the onset of symptoms and things. And the tools that you are given, you have to put them to work. Do you think that at first you were hesitant to use those tools?
On this incident, no, because I had the tools, I knew I needed to put in that work because I knew something was going to happen. And looking back, I'm just thinking, had I not been in therapy, it could have been even worse for me.
Absolutely.
But I had already been in therapy and getting the tools and attending. I went to depression classes and anxiety classes, and I was in a support group that met weekly up until April of 2019. So I had even 6 months of no support group before this happened. So it's kind of like a perfect storm for me, actually. And, but, I mean, it was very important for me to continue to do that work. But I had all these other outside influences, not in a positive manner.
Yeah.
So
when did you find yourself kind of taking that corner and gaining control? When did you find that you were actually like, okay, I'm able to dictate and I'm able to steer this ship?
oh my gosh. So it wasn't until after I retired, actually. So I went,
Yeah.
I was in workman's comp. My psychiatrist signed me off and said, you're not able to do this job anymore. And I was going through therapy and stuff until 2021 when they deemed me permanently disabled as far as workman's comp was concerned. So that was when I had to make the big girl decision on, okay, we need to retire because we can't go back and do this. Um, and that's when I think getting all of the stressors out. So not having the stress of work, not having the stress of certain coworkers and things like that. I was able to finally gather myself and actually get a little better. And so
Yeah.
that was what, June of 2021.
We tend to go into survival mode, and then when it gets a little bit better, we kind of feel like it's okay, and we can plateau. We can do just
Right.
enough work to survive, and we're not really truly thriving. We're rejecting the notion that stress is good. We're trying to constantly stay in the feeling of happy and feeling good. Did you find yourself seeking that comfort, constantly seeking comfort, whether it was, avoiding stressors, avoiding things in life that may push you in your, to get outside your comfort zone? Did you find yourself going inward? Once you left, what were some of the things that you struggled with?
I struggled with finding my place in this world. I don't know. When you're doing this job for so long, it kind of becomes your identity. And a friend of mine said, you're dispatcher Debbie, and I went, yeah, I guess you're right. And it was hard to come out of that and find me again. Um, but at the same time, I had a grandchild that was born right before my psychiatrist signed me out, and so it kind of gave me something to get up in the morning, if that makes sense, because I was watching him
Yeah.
for
That's
childcare after.
that's the number one pitfall for a lot of us. We kind of bypass our care, and it's different. Like you being a caregiver to a little one, like you have to devote yourself to that little one. But
Well, and you're no good to that person if you're falling apart.
yeah,
So it kind of
exactly.
helped me get, motivated to become a little better.
No. Do you think that when it comes to your specific trauma, when it comes to your journey, do you think you've come through on the other side? And if so, what did you lean on to finally push yourself across that finish line? And if you're not, that's okay. What are the things you're dealing with today?
Um, that I'm not. You never really get better. I mean, the symptoms kind of lessen over time, especially if you're working hard to get rid of them. And you're in therapy. Um, I still deal with survivor's guilt, and um, grief hits me at the weirdest times. I may be listening to a podcast and something just reminds me of whatever's going on. Couple of books that I have read, you have that, and it just takes you back to where you were at. Um, and it's just I'm not suffering. A lot of people say we're suffering with this. Some people may suffer. I'm just trying to live with it and trying to do the best I can, um, and control those symptoms. And even though I feel better, I know I still have to work at it, because if I don't work at it, then I'm going to go backwards.
It's interesting that you say that you can't overcome it. Why do you feel that trauma and PTSD is something you can't overcome?
I think you can overcome it and live with it, similar to what I'm doing, but it's always going to be with you, because it's not just it's not a disorder, and like everybody thinks it is. It's a trauma injury, and it's going to be with you the rest of your life. Whether it's, a memory by the time you're 80 years old, or you're still, dealing with that. I mean, if you look at the guys that came back from World War I and World War II, and you see, like, my grandfather saw some stuff that he never talked about and he never dealt with. And I never knew him. Every time we would come over to visit, he would be back in his room for some odd reason. And nobody ever knew. And it's very sad that people think they're okay, or they're trying to deal with stuff, but they don't get the help that they need. Back in the day, it was shell shock, or
Yeah, but now times have changed and we have access to
right.
so many different modalities, so many different things that can help us. And this is why, and it's crucial to understand now more than ever, because people love to embrace the identity. Like, okay, I'm broken, I will never heal from this, but that's not the truth. That's like, I'm a living proof of it. And everybody that I've worked with closely, and doctors that will help you overcome this, like, there is a way forward. It does not have to be your identity. It doesn't have to be the thing that you define your life. And that's the crux of the veteran idea, this identity that we've been given, especially for the early GWAT, and first responders get it as well. this idea that you have to hang on to your trauma and you can't let it go. When in reality, there's tons of evidence and tons of treatments with proven efficacy that can help you overcome this. And it's an understanding that, yes, you will have to carry, these things, but you can drastically reduce the impact that they have on your life. It's no longer a giant weight on your back in your rucksack. You can minimize it to a small carryable load. It's understanding that you can process things so your mind and your body don't think you're going through that trauma in the moment. Things like EMDR, things like DBT, and something as simple as mindfulness can be a powerful catalyst for healing and recovery. But we have to do the work. And that's something that all of us have to understand. And I gently want to push back on this idea that the PTSD and trauma that you endure and anything horrible. And look, like I understand trauma intimately. I understand it from the point of whether it's something that happened in childhood or something that happened in combat and experiencing firsthand and going through moral injury. All those things leave an impact on your life. But nothing will take them. There's no magic wand. There's no magic pill. And I don't think we actually want that. To say that there's a magic wand, to say there's a magic pill that any of us can take would remove the human experience. Understanding that suffering, bittersweet, and grief are integral parts of our lives. We have to be able to say, you know what? I know that this sucks. I know that this is painful, but I'm willing to do the work, because that's the beauty of it. That's the real thing that we all have to discover in life. Understanding that life's worth working through these tough sticking points and getting better. And when we look at life, not just as this like thing of enduring and suffering constantly, but understanding that part of the work and part of all this is just the experience, and that it's okay. You have good days, you have bad days. What have you leaned on in your life? What have you done to find yourself to thrive?
In the past, I would try to do things that weren't law enforcement related. Having hobbies that were just, sewing and knitting and things like that to kind of take and now it's, I lean on my husband a lot. Um, he's been an absolute rock during this whole process. Um, but having my kids and my grandkids around has always helped. Um, but knowing the tools and just being able to find myself after dispatch. So my husband, when I retired, told me to take 6 months off. So
Great
that
advice.
just take 6 months off. Don't do, because I had an offer to start. Workman's Comp had offered me some classes, and he said, "Nope, I don't want you doing that yet." And then he kind of kicked me out of the house for 2 weeks. Literally said, "Here, there's your car, there's your suitcase, go." So I literally took a vacation uh, by myself, and I drove up to Washington to go see my brother, and I had some friends that lived up there. So I literally kind of just went out and got away from the area. And I don't think it was finding myself, but finding more of a direction that I wanted to go, and had a lot of time with myself. Um, then I took the class that Workman's Comp offered, and it kind of got me into that mindset of civilian life rather than being law enforcement. So now I have a job on the weekends also, that I'm just a receptionist. I go into to work, I make coffee, I put out cookies for people, I open up the clubhouse for the neighborhood I work for. And yeah, I talk to friendly people having good days. And it's really helped moved me forward. I'm not hanging back anymore. I'm not hanging on that story. I'm moving forward. I'm talking more about my grandkids and talking more about how my week was, rather than, that I feel so bad that, I had this horrible thing happen to me.
Yeah,
And
a lot of people get stuck in, especially when we talk about trauma bonding culture, where we're constantly reliving and re-engaging and talking and talking and talking about it and re-exposing ourselves to what we went through with other people. And whether we know it or not, our bodies, every time we retell that story, every time we retell that trauma, and you get that trauma response and you activate that fight or flight and you get that tightness in your chest, you're part of the problem is you never processed that trauma. It never became a memory of something you went through. Your body's still reliving that as if you're in that threatening environment. And it can become addicting. And we see it with people all the time. We see it with people that crave that sort of reliving, and it doesn't do anything for us. Being able to overcome that, being able to process that with a mental health professional is completely different. And that helps you kind of package it up and get over it and start moving forward. But when we choose to engage it and share it and sort of, in that trauma bonding experience with either close friends or strangers, it does nothing for us. And kudos to you for moving forward and not trying to engage with those memories anymore. And understanding that, hey, some days you're going to have bad days and those things will come up. What non-standard interventions did you rely on, or do you currently do things like yoga or anything like that in your life?
I started another support group, which is really good. It's called Power of Our Story, and they're online. And through them, I met this fabulous lady that does a group for women on Sundays. We do meditation and journaling, and it's really been a huge help.
Yeah.
Been doing that for 6 weeks, and I really look forward to that every week now. And it's just an hour, but it kind of helps me reset for the week. And I'm amongst like-minded individuals, but we don't talk about our traumas.
Yes.
We talk about the happy stuff.
Yeah.
So, and so that's been a huge help. And I still do 3 miles a day in the mornings. My grandson and I go on a walk, and we get out of the house and get some natural vitamin D. And we end up at the park, and he runs everywhere. And it's nice to just get outside and not, for over 20 years, I worked graveyard shifts. So,
holy cow. Wait, go back. You stayed on graveyard shift for the majority of your career?
Yes.
Holy
it was wonderful.
You loved it.
But I loved it. It was great. But, getting back to that day shift, it's been a little tough. It's been 4 years this year. So yeah. It's as soon as my psychiatrist signed me off, I made sure to get myself on a schedule, and
you have to. Yeah. It's
because otherwise otherwise I would have been just a mess.
Yeah,
so,
it's been proven. Individuals that are on swing shifts or night shift, like it does horrible things for your body. It is, it is not a good thing. And boy, hats off and kudos to you for taking that on. I mean, somebody's going to do it. Someone's going to be on that. And I would say was that the most dangerous time? It seems like everything bad happens at nighttime.
Everything bad happens on graveyard, and graveyard employees are why we have policies. So
yeah.
But I preferred it to daytime. Daytime, it felt like I was more the county operator and just giving everybody advice on who to call whereas
Yeah.
on graveyard shift, it's actual stuff that's going on. So I preferred that much better. Plus there were no suits in the office. So
Yeah. A microcosm of just just individuals that need to be there. Yeah.
yeah.
What do you
So
find yourself looking forward to in this second chapter, in part 2?
part 2, doing this, going around and telling my story and hoping that it helps somebody. Because I didn't have that, there wasn't this type of, there were no podcasts, there was no groups, no trauma retreats, no nothing like that
Yeah.
when I started. And if I can help that one person, then that's all that matters. And getting the word out to departments to start this in your academies, get a good mental health base for all your employees, starting in the academies, starting in basic training for the military, and give people those resources and not have the shame or stigma put on it just because you're having a difficult time.
Yeah. Trauma-informed care. Yeah. Well, Deborah, I can't thank you enough for being here and sharing your story. But before I let you go, I want to ask you, now in your day-to-day life, you have support groups, you have things that keep you going on the right path. If you were able to go back in time and reach out to that younger Deborah that was feeling the first, sort of rumblings of needing assistance, what would be some advice that you'd give her?
No, go get help. I honestly didn't. I had my godmother told me to go get help, and I didn't listen. And and I think had I actually decide, and at the time it was why am I going to go see a psychiatrist? What's wrong with me? It was that whole thing. That was a stigma.
Yeah.
If I'm seeing a psychiatrist or a therapist, am I even good for the job I'm on? And is this going to be, now thinking back going, oh yeah, I should have stayed in that and it probably would have helped me a little more coming through. But hindsight's always 2020.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's not, and we have to remember, it's not, it may not be a benefit to us, but it's a benefit to the person that might be listening and to the people that come after us. So those lessons learned are valuable and they are important, because it's not about just our journey. It's about the journey of you, the audience, the individual listening. If you're struggling, please reach out for help. There's absolutely nothing wrong with calling 988 or texting or reaching out through Instagram or hitting us up on our email. If you need resources, need help, reach out, ask for help. Deborah, again, thank you so much for being here. I am so appreciative of your time and your story. And I can't wait to hear from your next adventure. And to all of you listening, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time. If you like what we're doing and you're enjoying the show, don't forget to share us, like us, subscribe, and head on over to our Patreon, where you can be part of our community and get access to all of our episodes as soon as they drop. And remember, we get through this together. Take care.